So I have gotten multiple requests to make a video about this car. It's still on the trailer from last weekend's activities. I haven't removed it yet, but didn't figure I would need to take this video. 2.3 EcoBoost and a 93 Foxbody coupe. Backstory on this car: it was my first car. I bought it whenever I was 15 for $800. I traded it whenever I was 19. And I ended up buying it back whenever I was roughly 21, 22. When I was 17, I did a 2.3 turbo Lima swap on it from a turbo coupe. Whenever I was, let's say probably about 6 years ago, I found this motor in a local U-Pull-It yard in a rolled over car, and took a gamble on it because the pan was broken and the motor ended up being fine. It's running a 2.3 EcoBoost control pack from Ford. It was about $1,500. I bought the motor for about $400. You can buy one of these motors as a complete long block from a salvage yard for probably around $2,000, I would say, somewhere in that area. Don't quote me on it. Most of the parts in here are going to be stuff that you can get off the shelf from pretty much someone. I tried to keep it as simplistic as possible so that way if I needed something replaced, I could call the company up, I could buy another one, I could do whatever. Well, the coolant lines, the intercooler pipes and stuff like that, they're all from Ford's control pack. The intake is obviously just got a cone filter with a little adapter instead of running the actual air box. I ended up just attaching the IAT sensor down here so that way it would actually be in there. It did actually screw into the airbox. It's not too terribly difficult. I just basically found a way to use it. My cat is coming to say hello. The ECU is mounted to a Fiesta ST ECU holder. It's just got some riv nuts in the frame rail and then it's bolted onto there. Does not have a standard power steering pump that would go here on pretty much any other Duratec setup. Obviously there's no space. It has a Volvo S40 electric over hydraulic power steering pump. Yes, I do have to unbolt it and lower it down to fill it, but it's one of those things I shouldn't have to fill too terribly often. You could run a standard mechanical belt-driven power steering pump if you excuse me, put in a Focus ST or any other 2-liter EcoBoost intake manifold. My issue and the reason why I didn't like it is because the throttle body was then pointed straight down. Makes it more difficult to route. Intercooler piping, wiring has to be extended, things like that, you know, XYZ. Factory turbo. The motor itself is completely stock. It has an aftermarket intercooler, it has a cone filter, and it has a catless downpipe from an EcoBoost Mustang. It was just an eBay one. I don't know if you can still get one. I do not believe you can because of all the EPA stuff that's going on. It is not tuned. It has a factory Ford Performance tune, but I do have a Cobb access port for it. They do make one for the EcoBoost swap control packs. That's for the 2.0 or the 2.3. Ford has stopped selling the 2.0 though, so you just use the 2.3, even on a 2-liter. The brake booster and everything fits still. I had to clearance the firewall just a hair for the high pressure fuel pump. I like that better than moving the engine forward because it makes it more difficult with the power steering rack and other things. I have seen people actually cut a square out of the firewall. I don't like that method. Personal opinion. Some other people might like it. They may think that this looks trashy. You know, I kind of agree with you. It does look trashy, but the difference in my personal opinion is that whenever I put that box in there, your eyes are immediately drawn to that, and that does not fit with the car. If I take the pinch weld and I bend it down and I kind of just beat the firewall in a little bit and recess it, it's fine. I do need to go in and I do need to paint it still, sooner rather than later. You know, some of the other things, like this lovely hole over here in the corner that I cut up with 10 snips whenever I was 17, being a dumbass, I also would like to go and fix, but it will at some point get a whole tubular front end from the strut towers forward, so that'll probably go bye-bye anyway. So it is running an AJEK member with their EcoBoost motor mounts. I do not know if they still make them. I'm pretty sure that they do. The mounts that I got, they are probably about 5 years old. They were prototypes at the time. They do not fit the best. I had to do some adapting to make them work, but they function. I will be going back and I will be making them better at some point. I may be switching to a Maxim Motorsports K member and making my own mounts, either with small block mounts or modular mounts, or just something completely custom from there that's a little bit more off the shelf. It's running one of the factory heater core lines for the EcoBoost, and then the other one I just went to O'Reilly's and got one that looked like it would work, and it does. They sell a Gates adapter that goes into the metal crossover pipe on the back of the head. It's running a T5, world-class T5 4-cylinder transmission. Not had any problems as of yet. I kind of figure it will break at some point, but as of now it is not. It's running a small block Ford adapter plate on the back of the block. The starter is on the left side of the motor, or should I say the passenger side of the motor. Left side from my vantage point, but right side from driver's seat. Factory is on the driver's side of the engine. You do have to clearance for that. Esslinger now makes an adapter plate that you can buy. It's $300-ish, I think, somewhere in that area. I did not have that luxury at the time. The transmission was my single biggest issue. You could run a couple other transmissions. S550, MT82 would be probably the most likely, but the cost is really where it comes down to. You spend $1,500 for transmission. The flywheel is $600 if you get a dual mass, or $400 if you get a aluminum one. The clutches are really expensive. They're around $1,000. It just gets insanely expensive. If you're going to spend the amount of money to get that thing to work, not have a speedo, have to use GPS, whatever, you might as well go to something, in my opinion, that is better, like a T56, which is my plan. You know, the other thing is you have to have a CV style drive shaft and a custom cross member and all those things. This car doesn't have that. It has a lengthened drive shaft. They cut the end flanges off and put a longer tube, the whole length tube, not just like a little section like a lot of the drive shaft places do, which is not as safe. The flywheel is a Ram Clutches aluminum flywheel it's a small block Ford flywheel with a EcoBoost bolt pattern drilled into it. It does not have a 50-ounce balance. It is a 0-ounce balance. This engine is a 0 balance engine. It is internally balanced, so you do not want a 50-ounce balance. The clutch is an Advanced Auto Stage 2 small block Ford clutch. It had good reviews whenever I bought it. I have had no issues out of it. I don't have any slippage problems. It's not a stiff pedal. I don't constantly break clutch quadrant cables and stuff like that. It's pretty good. There were reviews. There was a guy running 10.5-second quarter miles, and he hadn't had any issues, and it was cheap. So I was like, okay, I'll just go with that. The bell housing is a 94-95 5.0 bell housing. They're deeper. It allows you to move the transmission back. The shifter is the biggest fight that I probably had with this whole thing. I was trying to keep the weight as far back as possible, but I really couldn't move it any further back. I could not move the engine further back because of high pressure fuel pump and the firewall. The vacuum pump, like stuff like that. You can delete the vacuum pump, but you can't really delete the high pressure fuel pump. The vacuum pump is actually being used to run the brake booster. These do not have a very large plenum, so it kind of helps keep that vacuum up at all times. The cross member is a stock cross member. It does have an aftermarket trans mount. I bought one for a T5 that was for an S10. I was told that it would bolt right onto this transmission. It does not. I had to kind of modify it to get it to mount to the factory mount holes, but it has an adjustment where you can slide it forward and back and get it to where you need to. This was 2 years ago. I think that there are other options now. Don't quote me on that. The nice thing is that if you could buy a Stifler's cross member, and that would allow you to do the adjustment as well. So you could do that. You could also find the SN95, 9495 trans mount, and that would probably help too because they have an offset, but they're kind of hard to find. I was trying to find something a little bit stiffer that wasn't so soft was the other thing, and that's kind of why I went with that. you know, hindsight's 20/20 type of situations. The downpipe fits perfectly fine. It had a little spot where I had to kind of like tap in the floor, right where it curved to go level with the ground at the very base. Much less than that. By tap, I literally mean I tapped it twice and it was cleared. You have to have an adjustable fuel pressure regulator. These motors were designed to have a returnless system. The control pack has a return style fuel system, so it still operates like stock. You set the fuel pressure. I don't remember what it is set at. I don't remember if it's supposed to be set at 60 or 43.5. I'd have to look, but the instructions kind of reference it. But it is a boost referenced or vacuum referenced regulator, just like any other one. So 1 pound of boost means 1 pound more fuel pressure. Man, my FedEx guy's coming, so he's gonna be grabbing some boxes that I got shipping out. If there's any questions about that stuff, I would be glad to answer them. As for the inside, it's pretty stock, trying to keep it as stock as possible. It's, like I said, it's got the AP over there. The only other stuff that's aftermarket is the pedal. You know, I've got to reach down every time for the clutch switch to start it, which I really want to get mounted, but it's kind of difficult. With moving the transmission, I had to move it forward just a hair, even with the bell housing, so I had to notch this so I could get it into first, third, and fifth better. But it's not too terribly difficult. You know, I would prefer not to have that, but it is what it is. I have to make do with what I got. And when I go with the T56, hopefully I don't have that issue. I don't notice it when driving that it's further back. The car has, there's a company that makes an adapter for the gas pedal, and that's the same one that you would use on a Coyote swap car. It's about 80 bucks. It's not expensive. The gauge cluster is all stock. The tachometer does not currently work. The temp gauge and the oil pressure gauge do not work either. I will be putting in senders to make that work. You can still do that with the factory harness that runs in the car. That's not that difficult. The speedo still works, the voltage still work, and the fuel levels still work. I have found that I can actually get the tach to still work, supposedly, but I need to verify that more than anything and probably test it. I want to keep it as stock as possible. I'm not a huge fan of Dakota Digital stuff because it's trying to keep a stock appearance, but you can tell it's not stock, and that's kind of what bothers me about it. If I'm going to go to that aftermarket look, I am going to go aftermarket. I'll put a race pack in this car. I'll make it actually aftermarket, and I'll have a lot better usage. You could put AC in this car. I don't have it currently. I may in the future. My end goals is roughly 600 wheel torque, which means probably around 7 to 750 horsepower. You know, one of the reasons why I need a T56. This will not take it. One other thing to comment about with the transmission is that the pilot bearing is the factory Lima pilot bearing. It is a 4-cylinder transmission. It has the factory pilot bearing. That pilot bearing part number is the same from a 2.3 Lima to a Duratec. So anything from 74 all the way to 2022, they use the same pilot bearing. So that's a nice thing as well. Pretty much this whole car, I tried to make it as off the shelf as possible, so that way you can literally grab something from either Ford or from the auto parts store and slap it on and go about your business. It has a newer power steering rack with the Volvo pump, like I said. That is pretty easy to put in as well. It's literally a power, like I would say probably a 2 to 4 gauge main power, a ground to the rail, and then a 12-volt signal. When you turn the key on, it powers the pump up. It's pretty simple. Then you run an AN line to the rack, and you are able to have power steering without having to worry about belt routing. So it's pretty simplistic. You put the key in, still beeps like factory. Prime the fuel pump, and that buzzing is the power steering. The nice thing about that is when your Ford breaks down, like they all tend to do, just like every other car on the planet, you can still steer it pretty easily. You know, the lovely things about it though is it will kill your battery if you leave the key on for an exorbitant amount of time. It does pull a lot of amperage. So I can turn the steering wheel really easy, which is nice. And my straps are even still on it. But it will run for, I think it's about 10 seconds after it loses its 12 volt. And then it will shut off like that. So that's good. You can retain your factory power steering if you want to. You can convert it to manual. That does not matter. You can even go with a mechanical pump from a Ranger or a Mazda 3 or something like that if you really want to, but you will have to change the intake manifold, and I did not want to do that. Other than that, pretty basic stuff. The car is running Maximum Motorsports coilover setup with conies. It's running Maximum Motorsports 1-inch forward offset control arms in the front, stocker suspension with 220,000 mile bushings and all that stuff. That's next on the list to replace, but is currently out of stock on the panhard bar and the torque arms, and they're a couple months on back order, so I just haven't gotten those yet. It's got SN95 like V6, GT, whatever, solid disc rear brakes on it. It's got S550 front brakes. I actually had the caliper brackets made, and I've sold probably about 20 sets of those now, maybe 30. I really like this setup. It's a pretty low buck, 4-piston, 14-inch brake setup. It is honestly overkill, but I love being overkill. You know, there's one other company that makes a design for these calipers, but the biggest issue that I had with that was that you had to run a wheel spacer between the rotor and the hub, and in doing so you spaced everything out. You had to run a longer stud, which is like 180 bucks for the front. You had to run custom offset front wheels to clear the fender, because you can already see that this is really close. So at that point you are losing all the cost effectiveness of doing the swap. You should just get Brembos, you should get Stop Techs, you should get Willwoods, you should get something else. At that point you're spending $2,000 to do this. Was a waste. Calipers are about 90 bucks from Ford. The rotors are about 200 or $100 to $200. They're not too terribly expensive. Those are just auto parts off the shelf type of stuff. You are not buying you're not buying frozen rotors or whatever. You could easily upgrade to those. I really like them. The reason why you had to run the spacer with the other kit is that when you bolt the bracket that holds the caliper in on their setup, you have to run the bolt from the outside into the car. That's the way you bolt the bracket onto the spindle. Then you bolt the caliper to the bracket from the inside out. That's the way your caliper usually attaches. So this rotor does not allow enough space to do that without running that wheel spacer on their kit. So the way I corrected that problem is you actually tap the spindle ears to an M12 by 20 thread pitch, and you run the bolts from the outside in for the bracket. So all 4 bolts are run from inside out, and it saves that space problem. You don't have to run the custom offset. My brackets that I sold are honestly way beefier than the brackets that they made. In my opinion, you know, everybody has a different opinion. It's not like I did testing on it, but by looking at it, yes, they looked pretty. They're pretty beefy. They're made out of aluminum, 6061, and I've never had issues. I've run smaller brackets on similar size brakes, you know, Cobra brakes on my SVT Contour that I've got, and didn't have an issue with that. So this will probably get a bigger master cylinder at some point. It has a Cobra master cylinder right now, but it will probably get a new Edge or something like that, because I feel like it needs more master cylinder in it, because it's just pushing so much fluid for those calipers. They have so much piston diameter with all 4 pistons. So the rotors are GT500 rotors, or they're either GT500 rotors from a 07 to a 09, I think, or 12, I don't remember where that split off is, or the 11 to 14 GT Brembo package. The calipers can either be those same Brembo package calipers, or a GT500 caliper from the aforementioned years, or the S550 4 pistons. These are only 90 bucks. The Brembos are a little bit more expensive than that. So a little bit more clearancing goes into making these work, but it's not too terribly bad. I had to obviously shave the front of mine to clear the wheels. Very minor. It seems like a lot, but it really is not. A lot of people that I had sold these to did not have to do this. They were either running the Brembos or they were running different design wheels. I really like the Saline replica style wheel. I do. RPF ones, everybody runs them. I want something different. I'm honestly I love this design, but it's also one of those where I'm kind of over it at the same time, because of a lot of people go to this company and will buy tons of these wheels. But I think it looks good on this car. So, you know, I'll probably get some other wheels at some point. My biggest limiting factor is these tires, though. They're 8 years old. They're really hard. They're Sumitomos 300 plus treadwear tires, whereas my backs are a little bit newer, a little bit wider. They're Kenda K20s. I actually really like these tires for a budget tire, and they actually smush. They're a 180 or 200 treadwear tire, I do believe. I don't remember exactly, but they are not. I'm trying to find the treadwear rating right now, but I can't find it. But anyway, they're a good tire. I like them. I'll probably be getting a set of those for the front, running 255s on the front, 275s on the back. I could run wider in the back. I haven't rolled the fenders, but honestly, I need to either replace or fix that quarter panel, do something, whatever you want to call it, because my lovely self did this magnificent Bondo job back in high school about 13 years ago. So my high school automotive teacher basically kind of gave me the gist, and back then these cars weren't worth anything. They weren't popular. I didn't even actually like a coupe. I didn't like the trunk cars back then. I wanted a hatchback, and good thing I grew out of that one. But there's multiple things that I've done to this car whenever I was in high school that were stupid, like I think we all do. Difference is I've got to go back and fix them because I still have it. So, but if anybody has any questions or comments or ideas, I am more than happy to answer them. The car is very drivable every day. The only thing I would say is you can't have cruise control with a control pack. That's the number one feature you are not going to get with a control pack, is cruise control. So that would be about my only major complaint with it. Pretty much everything else you are fine with. If you could drive one of these every day with the factory options, then you can drive this car the way it is right now, as long as you're okay without cruise control. Most people, the way I would suggest it is that if you can do an engine swap on a car in 2 days, let's just say a 5-liter, if you could do it, pull it out, put the new one in 2 days, you probably could do this in a week. I did it in about a week or so. It's not too terribly difficult, especially considering now that there's a lot more stuff that has been worked out. For wiring's sake, there's only about 3 wires that run inside the car. You have one you have the accessory and power for the steering column, so your just ignition and then your crank signal. You have a ground. You have the main power for the fuel pump, which I have routed down here, under here, and it actually connects roughly in this area to the actual fuel pump. Still goes through the inertial switch. I don't want to have Pinto problems. Other than that, you have the gas pedal plug, you have the clutch switch, and you have the OBD2 port. You still get connectivity. You can check all the PIDs. You can see all the codes. If it's got a misfire, it's got some kind of problem, you can plug into there like any other OBD2 car and figure it out. And like I said, most of these parts are off the shelf. If I need a pulley, it comes from an Ecoboost. If I need a timing chain, it comes from an Ecoboost. If I need a clutch, it comes from a small block 5-liter 10.5-inch designed clutch. If I need to do the clutch and I want to resurface the flywheel, I call up Ram Clutches, which is only about an hour from me, and I can just take it to them, get them to drill out the rivets, put a new friction disc in it, or a new center ring in it, and then I'm good to go again. The transmission is World Class T5. It's pretty simple. Uses factory U-joints. I mean, really the only couple things that I can't get quick would be like motor transmission mounts, the adapter plate, most of that stuff that would be stuff that you really wouldn't be able to get 9 times out of 10 the same day anyway. or that wouldn't really fail. I don't really consider an adapter plate as a wear item. The starter is a standard small block Ford starter. To get the adapter plate to work, you do have to clearance the block some. But other than that, that's really about the only stuff you actually have to do to this engine to make this setup work. Otherwise, it is stock style stuff. Stock style aftermarket shifter, clutch quadrants, stuff like that. You don't need a hydraulic setup. You don't need anything crazy like that, like if you were going with an MT82, stock coolant bottle, stock coolant lines. My radiator fan is actually a Contour radiator fan. This one was actually from a car that I had bought that had this Vortex supercharger, which is why the section is missing. This one will probably end up in my SVD Contour that is going to have that Vortex supercharger, unless I decide to put one of these in it, which I'm really leaning towards at this point, because it has the same... I could put the transmission that is on the back of that basically on the EcoBoost. That's the lovely thing about it. You could run an MTX 75 from a Focus on the back of one of these motors and put it in a front-wheel drive application. So, which I may do, because if I put the supercharger on that car, for example, I will be making 300, 350 if I'm lucky. This one out the box makes 350. Parts are more readily available. It's smaller, it's lighter, much easier to work on, X, Y, and Z. So this motor might actually end up in that car, believe it or not, because I am going to be building another one of these with a Focus block, making the power. These blocks are the weakest link on the exhaust side. They changed the webbing on the block, and it's a little bit weaker. So that's something to be mindful if you're going for more power. They still do take, I'd say, somewhere in the 400s. I don't really follow that too much, so I can't tell you for sure. But yeah, I mean, everything is pretty off-the-shelf type of stuff. Normal Foxbody stuff. The only thing that really changes is under the hood. There's very few custom parts that you cannot get easily. At this point, this has become a little bit more popular, and the parts are becoming more readily available. Bell housing adapter. The transmission was my largest issue in this whole deal. So, but that was also 2 to 3 years ago. Whenever I started researching and setting this up, it was actually more like 4.5, 5 years ago. Took me about 2 years to get everything kind of together with moving and love life problems like we all tend to have in our early 20s. So, but, you know, once I finally got my butt in gear and decided I want this thing to run, it took me, I would say, a month to get it running. But that was with me having to kind of hunt for things. I had to hunt for how to mount the transmission. I had to mess with the engine mounts, because these mounts were prototype mounts and they didn't fit perfectly properly. You know, but, and a lot of, like, I spent more time because I changed the front end. I did a tubular lower radiator support. You don't have to, so I spent time to do that. Volvo power steering pump, so I spent more time to do that. You could just run manual. Things like that, things that just add time that you don't have to do. You could get this up and running in a weekend. As long as AJE has fixed these mounts, I don't know if they have, you could definitely get it up and running in a weekend if you had the adapter plate, if you sourced all your parts right off the bat and you had them. The only other thing would be the drive shaft. It does need to be extended about 1 inch to 2 inches, roughly somewhere in that area. You could get by without it. I was running for probably about a year the stock drive shaft with a spacer on the flange at the diff to move it forward about 3/8 to 1/2 inch, and I felt comfortable with that. But I would suggest not doing that. I am stupid at times. So that's probably one of the only things I would really suggest doing. Other than that, most of this stuff is fairly common stuff. Fuel pressure regulator, like that's regular stuff, and lines for that, and the fuel fittings and everything. So it really, most of what you're going to spend time with is just making it look clean, making it look pretty. But if you're one of those people like, hey, I want to drive this now, or it's your daily driver and you want to do something like this, you know, or let's just say you have a truck and it's not as fuel efficient, but you want to do an engine swap, you could do this in, I would say, a weekend if you worked on it nonstop. Maybe 2 weekends, especially if you've already got like an AJEK member and stuff like that, and you're not literally starting like I was, that had a stock K member and completely starting from scratch. I had everything out of here, and I didn't have the suspension on it. I didn't have, like, the only thing I really had was the radiator. I bought the plate up here to make it look a little bit better. I did some of the stuff with the suspension underneath. I did the power steering pump. I did all that. So you don't have to do that. Just to get it up and running and driving, I would say a weekend of being very busy from Friday to Sunday. You know, maybe if you're wanting to be a little bit more relaxed than that, you could easily achieve this in a week. You know, if you can live without your car for a week and just do some of this work, it's not too terribly bad. At least that's my opinion. I am a very fast worker a lot of times. I can have engines out. I could have this engine on probably about an hour and a half. So even with all the electronics, it is not difficult. It's pretty easy. So it really just comes down to your mechanical knowledge. But if you can replace a factory engine in a weekend, you could do this. It might take you a week to do this. I did it on the ground. So if you have a lift, probably going to be better than me, probably going to be faster than me. You can get underneath and work better. You know, but it is a very fun swap. The engine is significantly lighter than the factory. You know, you can see my wheel center line here if you look at it. So right there, it is just in front of cylinder 2. So basically about dipstick forward is in front of a wheel center line, so the weight is recessed pretty far back. This motor roughly weighs around 350 pounds the way you see it. The turbo, and I do know that the long blocks weigh right at 300 pounds. That is without accessories, that's without intake manifolds, you know, whatever. But the thing is that these don't weigh that much more when you add the intake manifold. It's plastic. The alternator weighs about 15 pounds. The turbo weighs about 15 pounds, 20 pounds, somewhere in there. It doesn't have an exhaust manifold, so there's no cast iron there. So this package is really not that heavy. The factory 5-liter and the factory Lima turbo motor weigh in the 560 to 580 area. So you're dropping roughly 200 pounds off the nose of the car. So that's a huge difference. And most of the stuff is plastic or rubber whenever it comes to the intercooler piping and the intake and all that stuff. So you can keep weight down there, but, you know, I still plan to go to aluminum at some point because who wants that? So, it is definitely pretty good for that, and especially whenever you're talking about a 350 horsepower package sitting right here and it is completely factory. But again, if anybody has any questions, I will be more than happy to answer anything. If there's not something, or there's something that I haven't covered, I will probably do another video of it running. But have a good one, everybody.